if we know we need to get on more podcasts, how do we know which way is right for us? How can we get booked?
So you could do it yourself, right? Which takes a lot of time. You could hire someone to do it in-house, right? You could have an assistant or a VA do it. And then of course there are agencies, there are services that do this for you.
How can I, as a podcast guest, make sure I'm finding the right shows to be on?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you have to do before you go out searching, you have to know what you're looking for. So I always make sure people are super clear on their target audience. Who is their ideal client? Who are they wanting to reach? What does that type of person need? What are their pain points? What are they interested in? What types of podcasts are they listening to?
Jessica Rhodes is the founder of Interview Connections. She founded Interview Connections in 2013, and her job, her goal, her career is to get you guested on more podcasts. Very excited to talk to the one and only Jessica Rhodes. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. We actually first met in Clubhouse, and I just heard you dropping so much great information. I said, I got to get Jessica on the After Hours Entrepreneur, and I'm glad you're here today because we're going to get down and dirty on podcast, booking, guesting, and all that good stuff. Woo.
Yes, let's do it.
I'm excited. So before we get into the nuts and bolts and the real tactics here, I would like to hear from you, Jessica. 2013, podcasting was still kind of under the radar, starting to come up. Why did you decide to open up a podcast booking agency in 2013?
Yeah, so I decided, hopefully you can still hear me because I think the connection might be cutting out. But yeah, so I decided to start a podcast booking agency after I started my business as a virtual assistant, first basically freelancing because I wanted to be home with my baby. Like number one, that was the goal. I wanted to be home with my now 8-year-old. And my dad was my first client. He is a business coach, and he had already been podcasting for about a year. And he said, hey, why don't you book me on podcasts? It's a way that I can be speaking without traveling. And I was like, sure. So I quite literally just started Googling business podcasts and doing some searching. I started pitching, getting him booked. And you know, as a host, you probably get pitched multiple times a week, probably multiple times a day. Back then, in the olden days of podcasting, nobody was pitching podcasters. Like I would send a pitch and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Who are you? What do you do? That's not what it's like now. But I saw a need in the marketplace. Nobody was offering a service that would connect guests with podcast hosts. And I was like, well, it seems like people really like this. I love doing it. I'll create a business around it. And so I launched Interview Connections in September of 2013. And for a good year and a half, 2 years, there were no competitors. We just grew and grew and grew and created a whole industry. Now there's tons of people that do podcast guesting and booking and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I love that this is that after hours entrepreneurial spirit. It's finding a problem and then creating solutions to that problem. And let's face it, podcast booking, I don't want to call it a problem, but it can be very time consuming. It can be also very challenging to actually find the right show to be on. So I want to start here because I have so many questions for you, Jessica. So many questions. But I want to start with this question. How can I, as a creator, or if I know that I want to be on podcast, how can I, as a podcast guest, make sure I'm finding the right shows to be on? What am I looking for?
Yeah, the first thing you have to do before you go out searching, you have to know what you're looking for. So just to kind of reverse engineer it, to know what you're looking for, you have to know what your goals are and why you want to be booked as a podcast guest. Why do you want that visibility? And who do you want to be attracting? So I always make sure people are super clear on their target audience. Who is their ideal client? Who are they wanting to reach? What does that type of person need? What are their pain points? What are they interested in? What types of podcasts are they listening to? So those are the first questions to get answered, because you could say, I'll just use like a basic example. Oh, I'm a marketing expert. I want to get booked on marketing podcasts. But who is your target audience? Who's hiring you to do their marketing? Are they listening to marketing podcasts, or are they over here listening to business podcasts, right? So knowing that and really looking at who your target audience is, and getting booked on shows that they are listening to. And there's multiple strategies, right? Even if your target audience isn't listening to a marketing podcast, there could be value in going on shows like that to build relationships with hosts and referral partners, build up your brand as a thought leader in that industry or that sector. So it's definitely a holistic strategy. There's not one right answer, but you first have to get real clear on the why, who you're reaching out to, looking at what types of shows that person is listening to. And then it just comes down to a lot of internet research. People are like, how do I find the shows? I'm like, well, you have to get really good at Googling and using lots of directories, because there's really not one place people have all the podcasts. Like, there's a lot of directories and they have their pros and cons.
Right. I mean, you're 100% right. Like, if you go to iTunes, it's very difficult to like sift through that to find the right podcast to be on. If I was looking for a directory, anything that you would recommend starting with, Jessica?
Well, one site that we really love, like we have a whole department for show research. Listen Notes is a great website. I think they have a free and a paid version, but I like that because you can search someone's name and see all the shows that they've been a guest on, which is a fantastic hack for finding shows, right? So if you search Jessica Rhodes and Listen Notes, you'll see all the shows that I've appeared on as a guest. So then you know that they take guests, because that's one important factor. If you're pitching podcasts, don't pitch a show that doesn't take guests. And you can also look for shows that maybe your competition has been on, because if they've had them on, they'll probably be interested in you. So I really like Listen Notes. There's a lot of different directories out there, but that's the one that we've been using with the most success.
I'm so glad I brought you on the program, Jessica, because you're already dropping knowledge bombs. Listen, everyone, you definitely want to follow Jessica. Find Jessica. I'm going to put a link to your Instagram down low, because I want to make sure everyone is finding you there. And of course, go to interviewconnections.com. And we've talked about how to find the right show to be on. What's a good way to reach out to them? Because to your point earlier, I get hit up all the time, all the time. And the percentage of people that I actually bring on my show that just cold outreach is like less than 1%, right? So how can we actually reach out to podcasts and actually get booked?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two things here, right? Obviously, cold pitching can and does work. We use it like as an agency booking thousands of interviews a year. We do a fair amount of reaching out to hosts with a cold pitch, and it does work. However, if you're doing this, let's say you're pitching yourself, I would highly recommend you actually take the time to do some relationship building with hosts before sending them a pitch. You'll have a much higher success rate in how many shows you're actually booking for yourself. So make sure that you're doing some research before you pitch the show. Because if you're sending a templated pitch to every show and it sounds the same, the hosts can just see right through that. They're like, yeah, you didn't even really listen to my show. I hate pitches that are like, love your show. It's like, no, you don't. You never, you didn't listen to it. So, do a little research. I like to say, hey, I know that your audience is made up of such and such. I understand that they're listening to your show to learn about such and such, which is why I believe my topic would bring value to them. So just do that, like simple, fill out that little Mad Lib there, explain that you've done your research and you understand. Another thing that you can do, number one, just like find them on social media, connect with them, friend request them, follow their stuff, comment, rate and review their show, do all of the things to provide value to them first. And I would even go so far as to say, reach out to them and say, hey, I really enjoy your show. I think it looks great. Are you open to a guest suggestion? Are you open to it? Because they might say, no, I'm not. I don't take any pitches. Fantastic. You don't waste your time on pitching them and you don't annoy them because they don't want to get pitches. But if they say like, yeah, what did you have in mind? You're now building yeses, which is a sales technique. The more you get someone to say yes, the more likely they are to say yes again. So if they say, yes, I'm open to a pitch, they are now more likely to say, yes, I want to have you on the show.
You're just checking off all the check boxes here, because to me, probably the biggest turnoff, Jessica, when I'm getting hit up for someone to be a guest is that wall of generic text. I won't even read it. I won't even read it. A tip, I'm not sure who I heard this from, but a tip I also heard is interjecting maybe a specific quote from that person's show. Maybe listen to an intro or an outro of maybe their most recent episode and try to take some quotes from that. That's the way to your point, let them know that you actually are listening.
Yes.
And to me, that makes a big difference. So let's say, for example, that we've done the research, we found a good show. We've put together our yeses, and we're going to go on to a show. Once I'm booked to go on a show as a guest, do I need to have a game plan going into that show to make sure I have the great experience?
Yeah, I mean, listen to their podcast. That's number one. Listen to an episode of their show so that you're familiar with their style. You know, some people ask if they're a guest on a show every single week on the same topics, is it going to get redundant? I'm like, no, like literally every single interview I've done is different, and I talk about a lot of the same topics because every host has a different personality. Every show has a different style. So just listening to the podcast, getting to know that person ahead of time, you know, asking the host, like, how can I be a great guest for you? Who's your target audience? How can I, you know, bring the most value? How can I make you look good? So just really coming from a mindset of service is the best thing that you can do, because having that mindset of being of service, having an energy of being of service, like just being there to serve, that is everything. Because honestly, you know, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who use this strategy, and it's the ones that are just constantly, I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm not getting anything, like waiting. I'm like, I don't care if I put you on the biggest show in the world. You're not going to get anything because you're just waiting for what you're going to receive instead of thinking about what you're giving.
No, I 100%. This is kind of a bizarre thing to me when I'm working with coaches or people that are trying to build some sort of coaching network or mastermind program. And this refusal to share your insights, you know, there's the thought of, I'm just going to share testimonials and calls to action, but there's a million coaches out there. You got to get, Gary Vee highlights this so brilliantly, is give away your best stuff for free, because people get hungry. They get hungrier the more you give them. I've noticed, you know?
Totally agree.
One of the things that I try to do going into a podcast is, again, I've interviewed a ton of people, hundreds of people, is a lot of people, one of the things I first ask is there anything specifically that you want to get across in this episode, right? And a lot of times people say, no, I'm just kind of here to talk or chat. I mean, I really feel like when you go into a podcast, you should have some sort of goal, some sort of single call to action, right? I mean, don't you think that's important?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if it's that they're not sure what they want to talk about, or they don't want to talk about what they want to promote. Because usually someone's like, what do you want to get out of this? I don't want to be like, I'm trying to promote my masterclass, you know?
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. But I do agree with you. It is important to have the goal, have the intention of what you want to talk about. So having those interview topics created up front, which I don't think we've really talked about, but I always recommend having a one sheet with specific interview topics and suggested interview questions. So I like to provide those. And then I always say, but you can ask me whatever you want because I'm here to be of service. You don't like have to stick to my suggestions.
Well, I like that idea a lot. And that's not something that I've actually prepared yet, but I'm starting to see this more and more and more as I'm connecting, is giving the host as many resources possible so that they can have a good interview, right? And I've go out of my way to make sure that my guests have information going into the show. You know, my team sends out multiple emails. I actually have a web page designed specifically for guests so they can go and see, okay, this is the show format. This is how you look good. This is how you sound good, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of pre-interview education, I think, is something that can be missed out on a lot. The other challenge I think you can get into sometimes, I actually made this mistake last night I was on a show, is you're plugging too much stuff. Right? Don't you feel like you can overwhelm someone if 1 minute you're talking about YouTube, the next minute you're talking about your podcast, next minute you're talking about your financial services? You can kind of overwhelm listeners.
Oh, 100%. One call to action, people. People are not, they're not ready to write down 5 different, action steps. Most people are listening on mobile. They're on their phone. They're walking around their house. They're exercising, right? So one call to action that's easy to remember, that's high value, that they're not going to wonder how you spell it.
Yeah. Yes. I absolutely love that. And then make it, of course, sharing websites, links, and all of that with your host is certainly a big deal as well. So we've done the interview. It's looked good, right? Now, post-interview, is there anything we should be doing as guests post-interview to make sure that we're establishing a firmer relationship with listeners and with hosts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, stay connected with the hosts that are interviewing you. So have a way that you're tracking what appearances that you've done so you can go back and make sure you know who's interviewed you on their podcast. You can reach out to them, keep in touch with them, send thank you notes, send gifts, reshare, repost the interviews. I hope it goes without saying you should share the interviews that you're on. Listen back to them. You can repurpose these interviews and then always give credit to the host. Like, check out this quote or use part of the interview as a blog post. Like you can transcribe it. And again, always link back to the original source where that content was created. But repurposing the content and then just continuing to share, because as you share the fact that you're getting booked, you will attract more interviews to you. I mean, we book our clients on podcasts, but they get way more interviews than we book them because people just start reaching out to them and say, oh, I noticed that you're doing interviews. Do you want to come on my show? Do you want to be on Facebook Live in my group? So you'll just build this momentum and get more and more visibility the more that you share. What you focus on grows. So if you focus more on how you're getting booked and sharing your interviews, you'll end up actually getting more interview opportunities.
Very well said. Very well said. And this is another thing. We talk about the website, or kind of like a landing page, where you specifically dedicate a page to shows that you've been on in the past, right? As seen on type of page. Because I know as a host, I'm way more excited to bring you on my show if I know I'm going to get a little excerpt or a little bleep on your page. To your other point, you mentioned this both before and after. You got to engage with these people's content. You got to engage with host content. It's those small things that you can do to go over and above that make you stand out.
Yeah. And I think just building your relationship with the host. And I want to touch on the fact that not every host is going to be your best friend, because some people are like, well, some of the that's fine, right? You're doing a lot of visibility. Some hosts you're going to really hit it off with, and you're going to become their client. They're going to become yours. They're going to refer. So I think it's important to have clear expectations that not every single person you meet is going to end up being that power partner bestie for you. Yeah. But you have to, sometimes you have to kiss a lot of frogs. You have to get out there and really build up your network to find that one person, those two people that end up blowing everything up for you in a really good way.
Yeah, love that. Love that. I totally agree. I want to talk a little bit about Calendly because I've been hearing so many mixed responses and emotions on Calendly. Personally, I really like Calendly. It's simple. I don't have to do this back and forth with guests and whatnot. But some people, it's a huge turnoff to use Calendly. What are your thoughts on using calendar scheduling software like Calendly for the booking process?
I'm very in favor of it. Yes. I mean, personally, I use Schedule Once, but I have nothing against Calendly. It's just the platform that I've been using. Yeah, Calendly, Schedule Once, Acuity. There's a lot out there. They have pros and cons. But yes, use a scheduling link. Of course, I've had the people that are like, I don't like a link. I think that's more of a personal issue for them than it is about the efficiency of using a link. In fact, it was so great that you used Calendly, because the original time that I had scheduled, I had to travel for family, and I just asked my assistant, I'm like, can you reschedule with Mark? And she goes, oh yeah, he has a link. I just did it and didn't even have to bother him about it.
Right. Well, that's why I love Calendly. It takes out all the extra stuff out of it just saves so much time. The flip side I've noticed, though, is when I'm booking outside of Calendly, it feels more personal in a way, and say, well, what about this time? No, I'm taking my daughter out that day, or no, I can't do. And it gives you that kind of that extra level of connectivity, because in some cases, when you just send someone a Calendly link and then you show up to a room 3 weeks later, there's sometimes I show up, I'm like, I don't even know who this person is.
I mean, I totally agree. You're definitely not wrong about that. It can be a lot more personal, and it kind of depends on how crazy your schedules are. So I'm a nightmare to schedule without a link, because my schedule's so crazy. We will go back and forth for a long time before we find something. But if I have a link, we could just find the time. So it has its pros and cons. If both people are a little bit flexible, you have that interaction of getting to know them a little bit. But if their schedules are crazy, it can be a little bit of a frustrating experience.
Yeah, I think the way that I'm handling it is just asking up front is, hey, can I send you a Calendly link, or would you prefer to do this hand to hand?
I like that. I think that's great. And you can always say, here are some times, if these don't work, let me know. I can send you a link. So you can kind of find the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's kind of where I've landed on, just because there have been guests that I haven't gotten because they don't read the Calendly link. So I'm always trying to figure out new things. What's the next way I can get better guests? I can get on better shows. And I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Clubhouse.
Yeah.
Okay. Clubhouse is complete. I can't tell you the people that I've landed because of Clubhouse on my show. I had Jasmine Starr on my show, Sean Anthony, Halataha I've had on the show, Steve Olsher from Podcast Magazine. There's someone else I'm missing. Benji Travis I just had on my show from YouTube. I'm trying to get Sean Cannell and Clubhouse is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to book podcast. What has been your experience with Clubhouse? What do you think the future of podcasting and Clubhouse and guesting is going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I love Clubhouse as well. I think it's a super effective way to be networking. And I've just seen incredible connections happen, getting people getting access to people that just would never have had a conversation. I mean, I've, hosted Clubhouses, co-hosted, co-moderated with Clubhouses with people that if they were like, hey, do you want to hop on Zoom and talk with me and two other people? I'd have been like, I really don't have time. But the fact that it's on Clubhouse, we're like, yeah, let's collaborate, let's talk. So it's just opening up so much more possibility for relationship building. It's been interesting because I saw like a really big surge, back sort of like December, January timeframe. I feel like it was like the hot thing and tons of people on it. Some people have gotten Clubhouse fatigue and kind of like backed away. But I think the people that have really stayed in it have really grown incredibly large audiences on this platform and are making a lot of money because of it.
Yeah, there's something unique about being able to have these conversations in real time. And, again, when we talk about the context of booking or being booked on other shows, when you can tell that you have a chemistry with someone, you can tell that someone is actually bringing good information. That to me is one of the best ways to get on someone's radar is that,
Yes.
that give.
Absolutely.
What would you say? What's a good recommendation on how we can take these meetings from Clubhouse off Clubhouse? Because there's no texting in Clubhouse. How can I actually meet someone in Clubhouse and turn that into a connection?
Oh my gosh, great question. I mean, I think number one, it's super basic, but like make sure your Instagram is linked, or I guess Twitter. I don't really use Twitter, but you have to have a way for people to contact you and connect with you. So having your Instagram linked there, and then just keep an eye on your messages and be proactive about messaging the people that you're connecting with that you want to have a relationship with. So I think it just comes down to being proactive and not waiting for someone to come to you or not waiting for people to reach out to you. But if you see people that you want to connect with, like you gotta go in there and initiate those conversations, find them on Instagram, turn on the notifications of people that you want to be connecting with. Because now there's so many rooms. I'm sort of like, I know someone's hosting a room right now, but now I can't find it. So making sure there's systems in place to find the people that you want to connect with. And then of course, if you're doing this, as an entrepreneur, clearly we're here talking to entrepreneurs, having a clear call to action, like not only looking at your Clubhouse bio and how you're positioning yourself there, but if they're clicking over to your Instagram, is the link in your Instagram where you want to be sending people to. So think about that roadmap that they're taking if they do have an interest in you and want to take the next step and find you off of Clubhouse.
Yeah, I mean, having synonymous messaging across platforms, super important. And same thing with imagery. I mean, there are so many people that I meet on Clubhouse and I go to try to find them on like LinkedIn or Instagram, but I can't find them because their picture is different. So,
yes.
I mean, I got to say, I think that everyone, if you're on Clubhouse, you should be using, if not the same, something very, very similar on all your social media platforms.
I think that's a really, really good point. Not all of my pictures are the same, but I think you can tell it's me in all the pictures. Like some people have it's like a picture of the sky and the clouds on like Facebook or something. And I'm like, who are you? Like, so make sure, especially as an entrepreneur, your whole online presence should be cohesive.
Yes. 100%. I want to talk a little bit about your business, right? Because when we're talking about all these different ways to book guests or to become guests on shows, right? There's various apps. There's just manual outreach, which you've given several really great tips. And there's also working with a podcast booking agency. If we know we need to get on more podcasts, how do we know which way is right for us? How can we get booked?
Yeah. So, I don't want to do a shameless plug, but I'm going to do a shameless plug. That's what we do. Right. So there's a couple different ways you can get booked. I'll kind of go through the three main ways. So you could do it yourself, right? Which takes a lot of time. You do need to have time blocked off because some people are like, yeah, I do this myself. I'll send some messages. And then it just doesn't go anywhere because most people don't respond to the first pitch. You have to follow up. So you could do it yourself and schedule it in, have a spreadsheet, use Trello, have a system where you're finding the shows, you're making a list, you're doing the outreach. So you can do it yourself. You could hire someone to do it in-house, right? You could have an assistant or a VA do it. Be mindful that you need somebody who's going to be good at podcast booking. A lot of people make the mistake and hire a VA. Administrative assistants do not know how to book podcast interviews. They are not trained to basically do the cold sales outreach that is required to book podcast interviews.
I will say, I just want to interject that I've had that similar experience. It's also very difficult for them to find the right podcast for you to be on, I've noticed.
Yes, because when you're doing something where the whole basis of it is connecting and building relationships, if you're going to invest, which you would be investing if you hired somebody, you want to make sure that they're going to have connections that they can hook you up with. And I mean, I have 25 full-time employees. Having a team member do something, you have to train them, you have to supervise them, they have to have clear KPIs. You can't just hire someone and be like, oh, now I don't have to do it. Like, for it to really be worth it, you have to manage them and train them and make sure it's being done. And it's hard to train someone to do something you've never done successfully yourself or you don't know how to do. So it's an option, but I just want to make sure people see the whole thing. It's not just like, you can't just hire someone and be like, cool, now I don't have to do it anymore.
Right. No, yeah, 100%.
And then
it's possible, but it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, there are agencies, there are services that do this for you. We have whole teams, right? So there's a lot out there. We were the first in the industry. Like I said, we have 25 full-time employees, 15 of which are booking agents. So we have a whole system down where we get to know you as an entrepreneur, your goals. We research the right types of shows we pitch you so you can work with an agency that takes it all off your plate and does it really well and like hooks you up with hosts that they have relationships with that you might not have been able to get in contact with.
Well, that's certainly a good point, because the podcast booking agencies are going to be developing relationships with the podcast themselves. It makes it much easier to get your foot in the door. Well, I got to say, Jessica, it's been a pleasure connecting with you both here and on Clubhouse and on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Listen, y'all, Jessica Rhodes is doing it big, living her best life. Jessica, thanks so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed this episode. I've got several other episodes right here for you. Smash one of these videos to make sure that you don't miss out on the tips, tools, and tactics of industry experts. Let's take that side hustle full time. Smash one of these links.